Thank you very much. It is great to be back at the Pachyderm Club. Very many friends here. I have two rules for the discussion today. Rule number one, no whining, no complaining, no excuses. All right? You make a mistake, you own it. You lose, you face it. First person who blames a hurricane has to leave. No whining, no complaining, no excuses. Second rule, no defeatism. 8 years ago today, Friday after the 2004 election, an incumbent president of the United States was reelected over his patrician opponent from Massachusetts. His party won 55 seats in the United States Senate. His party won a majority of the House of Representatives. That didn't happen Tuesday. His party had a majority of governorships. That didn't happen Tuesday. And everyone talked about how it was the birth of generations-long Republican majority, and what could the Democrats possibly do to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. 2 years later, the Bush coalition was in tatters. Things change. No cause is ever lost because no cause is ever fully, finally won. All right? This is a stage. The 2012 campaign, but for some canvassing and some recounts and some gnashing of teeth, is over. But the struggle for the ability of this republic to fulfill its ambition goes on. That never stops. No timeouts in this game. So that's where we are. I got a presentation I want to go through here. I'm happy to take any questions on any subject. By nature, I'm an optimist, and by birth, I'm a Kansan. So I kind of want to start with the positive piece, which is mostly where we're looking at in Kansas. Can we fire that up? What does everybody know about what happened in Kansas? Well, you haven't heard a lot about it in the media because it was good for us. But I like to start with long-term trends, big data sets. It seems to me most important that you look at not what happens day to day, but what happens over the long term. H.L. Mencken, great American writer, trying to tell what is going on by reading the newspaper is like trying to tell what time it is by looking at the second hand. Don't pay attention to the small stuff. Pay attention to the big stuff that matters over time, large data sets. Okay? Kansas voter registration last 20 years. 1992, the election where Bill Clinton became President of the United States. 43% of Kansas registered voters were Republican. 43%. The difference between registered Republicans and registered Democrats was 169,000. Comparing apples to apples, using the close of October registration in presidential years, the time when we have the most registered Republicans in Kansas. By the year 2000, at the end of the Clinton administration, the Republican advantage over Democrats had grown from 169,000 to 286,000. From 11.9% of registered voters to 17.6%. That continued into the Bush administration. 2004 was our historical high water mark. There were 329,000 more registered Republicans than Democrats in Kansas. Give credit where credit is due. The Obama campaign came into Kansas in 2008. They organized very aggressively. Won a big victory for Obama in the Kansas caucuses, yielded a huge delegate gain, and they registered a lot of Democrats. Between 2004 and 2008, the Republican registration advantage in Kansas went down from 329 to 286. We lost 43,000 voters off our registration advantage. Where are we now? Better than ever, back up to 344,000. So after 4 years of this president, the people of Kansas get the joke. Look at the long-term trends. We're back up to 44.6% of registered voters in Kansas being Republicans, near our all-time high of 46.2. We have 344,000 more registered Republicans than Democrats. That's an all-time high. And our differential margin is 19.4. That's tied for an all-time high in the modern era. The big story here is the Kansas Democratic Party going down to about 1 of every 4 voters in Kansas, down to 25.2%. There are more unaffiliated voters in Kansas now than Democrats. That's a long-term trend. Individual elections matter, candidates matter. The people in this room who worked really hard will tell you individual campaigns and candidates matter. But that's a long-term trend line. That says in Kansas we're going in the right direction. In the year 2000, there were 449,000 registered Democrats in Kansas. Year 2000. Today there are 446,000. There are 3,000 fewer registered Democrats in Kansas than there were 12 years ago. Over the same period of time, Republicans have gone from 735 to 790. Presidential results, 2008, John McCain got 56.6% of the vote. President got 41.6%. 15-point margin. That expanded out to a 22.2-point margin for Mitt Romney. He went up about 3.4. President went down about 3.8. Again, a positive trend line. Kansas statewide and federal offices over time. If you look from 1970 you look at the number of Democrats from Kansas in Congress. Bill Roy, Martha Keyes and Dan Glickman, Dan Glickman, Jim Slattery, up through 92. Nobody in 94, nobody in 96. Dennis Moore and Nancy Boyda in Topeka. Then 2010, none. In 1994, Kansas Democratic Party won no U.S. House elections in Kansas. First time in a generation they hadn't done that. They had two very strong candidates. They had Dan Glickman, a 9-term incumbent, running for re-election in Wichita. They had John Carlin, a 2-term former governor, as their candidate in Topeka, but they lost. In 1996, the Kansas Democratic Party won no races for the U.S. House of Representatives. They lost by single digits in 3 different seats. Randy Rathman here in Wichita, John Fried in Topeka, Judy Biggert in Johnson County. So basically, from 1970 through 2008, the Kansas Democratic Party always had at least one member of the U.S. House from Kansas, or was very close to having one. In 2010, that changed. They lost every U.S. House election in Kansas by at least 20 points. But even then, they had 2 strong candidates. Raj Goyal here in Wichita ran a strong campaign, had a lot of money. Stephene Moore, wife of Dennis Moore in Johnson County, ran a strong race up there. In 2012, all that changed. 2012 was the highest number of votes and highest overall percentage of votes ever received by Republican U.S. House candidates in the state of Kansas. There was no Democratic candidate who got even 40% of the vote. Only one Democratic candidate lost by less than 32 points. That in Kansas is the locking in of a long-term structural Republican advantage. All 4 congressional incumbents reelected in Kansas and building cash reserves. As of their last report, October 17, Tim Huelskamp had $487,000 in the bank. Lynn Jenkins, $1.2 million. Kevin Yoder, $1.1 million. Mike Pompeo, $1.2 million. Our 4 congressional incumbents in Kansas, just a couple weeks before the election, had $4.1 million in the bank. They will post a similar total at the end of the year this year. That is a big structural change. At the end of 2010, all those folks were broke. Now they're going to have $4 million in the bank. That's how we start the 2014 cycle. U.S. Senators. Senator Roberts is seeking re-election. Has $750,000 in the bank. Senator Moran has $261,000. You take the Republican federal incumbents in Kansas. As of our most recent reports, they have $5.129 million cash in the bank. Democrats, $89,000 with $53,000 in debt. Senator Moran is seeking the chairmanship of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, which would be a very good thing for Kansas. If any of you are close to any Republican senators in other states, please feel free to drop them an email or a call mentioning what a great job our native son would do. Future statewide offices. Not to make any news today, but Governor Brownback, Lieutenant Governor Collier are seeking re-election. At the end of 2011, they had $439,000 in the bank. Governor Sebelius, at the same point in her re-elect cycle, had $173,000. $150,000 at the end of 2004. You take the total of every Democratic statewide candidate in Kansas. At the end of 2011, they had $3,134 in the bank. All of that was held by Dennis McKinney, the former state treasurer, who lost his race for his old state house seat on Tuesday. Where are we in the Kansas Senate? Long-term trend. I start the discussion of where we are in history in state legislative elections in Kansas with 1962. There's an important reason for that. Does anybody know why? For the first 100 years of Kansas history, a legislative district did not have to have the same amount of population, roughly, as another legislative district. There was a U.S. Supreme Court case in 1962 called Baker v. Carr. It said every legislative district within a state had to have roughly approximate population to every other. Big change. First century, for the state of Kansas, every county in Kansas had 1 member of the U.S. House, or 1 member of the state house. 105 individual county members. Only 20 members elected in districts according to population. By the way, if you ran the 2012 election under that set of rules, you'd have 111 Republicans and 14 Democrats. But in 1962, we started to have fair maps. Big change. Starting that point, we had an era here, 64 to 76, where you had between 27 and 32 Republican senators. Post-Watergate, Democrats do very well. They basically spent about 16 years at rough parity in the state Senate. Following the election of President Clinton, Republicans go back up to a big majority, 27-31. But still, never in the modern era have we had more than 32 Republican senators. You know how many we elected on Tuesday? 32. We tied for the highest number of state senators we've ever elected in the modern era in the state of Kansas. 32. We had one candidate, Anthony Brown, who got 47% of the vote and lost. We had a second candidate, Richard Barta, who got 48% of the vote and lost. And we had a third candidate, Bob Reeder, who got 49% of the vote and lost. And we still got 32 senators. Kansas House, start 1964 again. First election under the new maps. Republicans 77 to 87 seats. Watergate again, you see a dip. You see Republicans for this entire 22-year period were below where they were in the previous 8 years. In fact, twice in that period, 1976 and 1990, Kansas Democrats actually had a majority in the Kansas House of Representatives. Not that long ago across the sweep of history. 1994 election, again post-Clinton, Republicans are back up near their historic highs. But at no point in this 50-year history were Republicans ever over 87 seats. At no point since Watergate were Republicans ever over 83 seats in the State House. You know what happened in 2010? 92 Republicans in the State House. So you figure, wow, yeah, gosh, 92 Republicans in the State House in 2010. Big, clean sweep here. Republicans all working together. Great turnout machine, wow. But once you do that, I mean, surely after you have a great election like that, there's going to be a regression to the mean, right? I mean, there's an ebb and a flow to politics. You're going to come back a little bit. Surely Republicans are set up in 2012 under a new set of maps that they're going to lose seats. So we had this huge, historic, unprecedented number of 92 seats in 2010. You know how many we won in 2012? 92. That is a long-term structural majority. That's not a mistake. That's not a fluke. The only thing harder than doing that once is doing it twice. That's back-to-back. The Kansas Democratic Party had a very simple strategy. They were going to focus only on districts that were on their side of the 50-yard line. You know how wide the Republican effort was in 2012? We had Republican candidates break 40% of the vote in 36 of the 40 Senate districts. We went 32-4 in those districts. Republican House candidates broke 40% of the vote in 110 of the 125 districts in Kansas. We went 92-18 in those districts. Never before in modern state history has a party put together such a vast coalition and competed so strongly in so many legislative races across the state of Kansas. Now compare that to the Democratic Party. Democratic candidates broke 40% in 18 of 40 Senate districts. The Democratic Party basically wrote off a majority of the Kansas Senate. They were only going to play in the 18 Senate districts where they had the best chance to win. They were only playing on their side of the 50-yard line. Same in the House. Democratic candidates break 40% in only 60 of 125 House districts. So they're going to start by saying, we cede a majority of seats, 22 of 40 to Republicans in the Senate. We cede a majority of seats, 65 out of 125 in the State House. We're only going to play on our side of the 50-yard line. We're going to put all of our money there. We're going to put all of our effort there. We're coming into new maps. We're coming off an historic loss in 2012. Surely now we are set up for at least a little gain, right? A little bit of a dead cat bounce. Okay? Colby works in investment. He knows what a dead cat bounce is. A dead cat bounce is a trend line on a stock price. It's been going down over time, but if you look at it over time, there are these little increases. That comes from the fact that if a dead cat drops fall enough, even it'll bounce. Surely the Democrats are set up for at least a dead cat bounce. And the press are so ready to write this story. The Republicans, heady and wrong and drunk with power after their 2010 victory, misreading it as a mandate. Now see their gains reversed as Democrats advance in Kansas. And any regression to the mean would be shown as a resurgence of the Democratic Party in Kansas. Yeah, problem is it didn't happen. Of those, Democrats go 8-10 in the Senate and 33-27 in the House. They only really competed in 78 of 165 legislative districts. And in those 78 districts where they even chose to play, they went 41-37. That is an astonishing defeat for the Kansas Democratic Party. That is the worst legislative result for the Kansas Democratic Party of the modern era. Worse than 2010. And that is a tremendous affirmation of the work of Republican candidates and Republican activists and donors across the state of Kansas. What does that mean going forward? In contested Senate races, the 31 where they bothered to field a candidate, Republicans won 57-43. That's not counting the 9 districts where Democrats didn't even file a candidate. Republicans won by 14 points. In contested House districts, not counting the 33 districts where Democrats didn't file a candidate, or in fairness, the 6 where Republicans didn't file a candidate, Republicans won 56-44. There are reasons for this. It didn't come out of nowhere. We just came out of the Sebelius-Parkinson administration. From 2001 to 2001 to 2011, Kansas lost private sector jobs. There were fewer people working in private sector jobs in Kansas in January of 2011 than in January of 2001. In 2010, yes, the whole country was facing tough problems. Kansas was dead last in the United States in private sector job growth. We declined personal income in the last 2 years of the Parkinson-Sebelius administration. We had the second highest state and local tax burden in our region, higher than every one of our neighbors except Nebraska. And we were losing taxpayers to every surrounding state, guess where? Except Nebraska. We had the 6th highest in the country in state and local public employees per capita, the highest per capita general obligation debt in our region, the 2nd most underfunded public pension plan in the United States, and the cash balance on the first day of the last fiscal year of the Sebelius-Parkinson administration, when the state of Kansas was set to spend $6 billion and by law was supposed to have $450 million in the bank, the state of Kansas had in the bank $876.05. That is the record of Democratic leadership in Kansas. So let me suggest to you that that Republican success doesn't come from nowhere. It's based on facts and ideas and performance. And that's part of why I believe it'll be durable if we keep doing our work. Associated Press did an exit poll in Kansas. This is what they wrote day after the election. Brownback gets good marks. Governor Sam Brownback is getting mostly good reviews after nearly 2 years in office. More than half of voters said they approve of the former U.S. Senator on the eve of massive state tax cuts that are set to take effect in 2013. Amazing what happens when you get real data to look at. Past and present, turnout in the United States. One notable feature of this election, and I'm going to go quick through this part and take any questions you have. Basically, for most of American history, since the expansion of suffrage, you had about 50 to 55% of the American people voting. In 2004, when President Bush was running for re-election, 60% of the American people voted. Under President Obama, it was 61.6%. This election looks to be a little below that, about between those two. So one feature we have going forward, looking at a big data set, more people are voting now than ever before. That's a good thing. But what else does that mean? Big trend to look at. Gallup survey, September 6 through 9, 2012. U.S. distrust in media hits new high. Dayline, Washington, D.C. Americans' distrust in the media hit a new high this year, with 60% saying they have little or no trust in the mass media to report the news fully, accurately, and fairly. Distrust is up from the past few years when Americans were already more negative about the media than they had been in years prior to 2004. That's a Gallup poll trend line. You can get on the Gallup website. It shows 60% of Americans having little or no confidence in the media to be accurate and fair in their reporting. The record distrust in the media also means that negativity towards the media is an all-time high for a presidential election year. This reflects the continuation of a pattern in which negativity increases every election year compared to the year prior. The current gap between negative and positive views, 20 points, is by far the highest Gallup has recorded. In the 1970s, when Gallup asked the same question, 72% expressed confidence in the media. Trust in the mass media by party. Well, 58% of Democrats think the media is fair and accurate. That's according to Gallup. 26% of Republicans and only 31% of independents, showing a pattern which should hearten you, that on most issues and their perception of things, independents tend to think like Republicans. This year's decline in media trust is driven by independents and Republicans, 31 and 26% respectively, who express a great deal or a fair amount of trust. They are record lows and down significantly from last year. Despite their record low trust in the media, however, Republicans are the partisan group most likely to pay close attention to the news about politics. So think about what all that means. You got record high participation among Americans. You have record low trust in the media. And in particular, you have Republicans and independents who express the most dissatisfaction with the media paying the closest attention. That's important as we go forward here towards the end. Okay? Kansas leads the way. Associated Press, Kansas officials on Friday, this was in September, reported several positive trends in the state's economy from August, including a small dip in the unemployment rate to 6.2%. By the way, in October that went down to in September that went down to 5.9%. CNN, August 29 of this year, a quick check of the governor's party affiliations shows 29 states with Republican governors, 20 states with Democrat governors, and 1 state headed by an independent. According to the BLS preliminary seasonally adjusted data for July of 2012, 7.84% of the civilian labor force of the 29 states with Republican governors were unemployed. The same data set shows that 8.7% of states with Democratic governors were unemployed. The difference between 7.84 and 8.77 isn't a full point, although it's close. So basically, on average, states with Republican governors had 1% lower unemployment rates than states with Democratic governors. What that means to me is there's a couple things we need to do going forward. We need to stay true to who we are. We need to do a better job of building our coalition. We need to grow our states faster than the Democratic states grow. You may know Mitt Romney, carrying the same states that John McCain carried, actually got 6 more electoral votes out of those states. You know why? Because over the previous 10 years, the equivalent of 4.5 million Americans picked up from blue states and moved to red states. That matters. That's a real good clue as to where the growth is. The third thing we have to do, get better in technology. Big 4 lessons learned. Number 1, combine conservatism and populism. We talked about how a limited government message was good for the economy. I don't believe we ever effectively made the case that the broad public dissatisfaction with Washington is driven by the fact that Washington has too much money and too much power. That what people perceive as the corrupt influences of our national government are directly tied to how many resources we put under political control. And that not only is small government good for the economy, smaller government is cleaner government. And that's a mantle we should own. Number 2, there is no future for an exclusionary nativist party. Embrace diversity and growth. Happy to take questions on that. The country is embracing its diversity. The Republican Party, if it is to lead the country, must do the same. 3, the technological arms race is on and we're behind. In 2004, the Bush campaign had pioneered this use of something called micro-targeting. It was considered this great new political technology that was going to redefine the landscape. The Obama campaign has gone beyond that in 2008 and beyond that in 2012. And they invested in it consistently. The Romney campaign only seized the nomination in April. They had about 6 months to try and catch up what had been really 6 years of work on the Democratic side. One member of the Romney campaign described it as trying to build an airplane while you're flying it. There is a big investment there in technology, particularly in data mining and voter tracking, that has allowed the Obama campaign to bypass the media filter, contact voters directly, and motivate them and get into their social circles. The arms race is on, and right now we're behind. Last one, grassroots organization is more important than ever. Romney campaign spent $1 billion. National Republican Senatorial Committee spent $150 million, plus minus. Crossroads GPS spent $300 million. That's close to $1.5 billion. Let me suggest that one more TV ad wasn't going to make a difference. Whatever the level of marginal utility is, where it asymptotically approaches 0, we got there. More TV ads weren't going to help. The fact is, everyone agreed what the 9 battleground presidential states were. It was Nevada, it was Colorado, it was Wisconsin, it was Iowa, it was Ohio, Virginia, North Carolina, Florida, New Hampshire. 9 battleground states. You know how many we won? 1. We won North Carolina, we lost the other 8. Everybody agreed what the same 12 target U.S. Senate races were. 12 target U.S. Senate races. Nevada, Montana, North Dakota, Missouri, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Iowa, Pennsylvania, Indiana, or Ohio, Indiana, Virginia, Florida, Massachusetts. You know how many of those we won? 2. Nevada and Nebraska. Everyone agreed the same 7 target governor states. Washington State, Montana, Missouri, West Virginia, Indiana, North Carolina, New Hampshire. You know how many of those we won? 2. 9 competitive presidential states, 12 competitive Senate states, 7 competitive governor's races, 28 races. We won 5 of those 28. We won North Carolina president and governor. We won Nebraska Senate. We won Nevada Senate. We won Indiana governor. That is it. We lost the other 23. And so as much as I believe it is important, we stick to our principles as a party, there are clearly some things we're doing that we're not doing right. And let me suggest there's a lot the Kansas Republican Party can teach the National Republican Party. Now, I am eager to go forward in that work with you all. Wichita and this club in particular remain one of the bright lights, one of the brightest states in the Union. You are doing the right things in the right way. You're being rewarded for it. You're helping to make a better community, better state, better country. I want you to be proud of that. And I want you to know that Governor Brownback and his organization stand foursquare with you in that good work. And the best way to go forward politically is to make good policy and tell the truth to Kansans about that. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to take any questions.